a military doctor, a small wooden box holding ashes, and a promise she hasn't been able to keep. All she wanted was to bring her younger brother home, a soldier who gave his life in service. But at the Atlanta airport, she was denied boarding. No clear explanation, no respect. She stood there in silence. Until a veteran spoke up, then another, and soon the crowd was on her side. And before long, the entire nation was watching. This story made headlines across the country, and the truth, long buried, finally came to light. But before we dive into this powerful story, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city and the time you're tuning in down in the comments. And if this story speaks to you, don't forget, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next one. Snow was falling hard outside Atlanta International Airport. Wind whipped through the glass doors like the cold, weary sighs of winter. It was early morning. Soft yellow lights shimmered off the wet marble floor inside the terminal. Travelers hunched inside thick coats, standing in quiet lines, their faces etched with fatigue from flight delays. A sharp announcement pierced the low murmur of the terminal. Flight 847 to Minneapolis is delayed until 2:30 p.m. Passengers, please wait at gate 17. Amid the crowd, a woman in uniform stepped inside, quiet but impossible to miss. Dr. Bennett, slim in stature but steady in her gaze, held a carefully polished mahogany box close to her chest. It was small, but it carried the weight of an entire world. Inside were the ashes of her younger brother, Sergeant Kieran Bennett, a young soldier who had fallen in Syria just 3 weeks earlier. Her military boots echoed across the stone floor. Click, click, click. Each step sharp, deliberate, like the pounding heartbeat of a soul trying to stay upright in the face of heartbreak. People began to turn. Some looked with quiet sympathy, others with detached curiosity, and many simply lowered their eyes, avoiding her gaze, as if her presence reminded them of truths they'd rather forget. She didn't say a word. Her eyes found the sign. Delta, check-in counter 3. Under the sterile white light, passengers stood waiting. Maya took a deep breath, gripping the box tightly, as if it were the only thing tethering her to the ground, and stepped forward. A gust of cold air swept through the automatic doors, lifting the edge of her coat just enough to reveal the row of service medals on her chest. Silent emblems of a woman who had saved countless soldiers in battlefield hospitals, but couldn't save her own brother. What no one could see was what she kept in her inner jacket pocket, something even heavier than the ashes. A small USB drive. Inside it, a video never seen by the public. A recording of Kieran's final moments. Maya wasn't just bringing her brother home. She was fulfilling a final promise. "Don't be afraid, Kieran," she whispered, barely audible. "I'll get you home, and I'll make sure the world knows what really happened." Her voice may have been soft, but her eyes burned with a fire that no storm could ever put out. The Tremaya Bennett stepped up to Delta check-in counter 3, gently setting the polished wooden box on the counter. From her uniform pocket, she pulled out a folder. Military ID, official transport authorization for human remains, and a letter from the Department of Defense. She laid each document down in neat order. Her expression was calm, but her fingers gripped the edges of the papers just a little too tightly, as if holding back something deeper beneath the surface. Behind the counter, a young employee typed quickly on his keyboard. His name tag read Alex. Slim build, Bluetooth headset in one ear, hair tousled from what looked like a long shift during the storm. He greeted her with a practiced smile. "Good morning. How can I—" "Oh, Captain." His eyes briefly flicked to the insignia on her chest. Maya nodded silently. No explanation needed. "I'm on assignment, escorting the remains of a fallen service member home. Here's the paperwork." "Yes, of course. Just a moment while I check the system." Alex leaned in, typing faster now. The tapping of keys filled the air, sharp, rhythmic. A few moments passed. Then, his expression shifted. First, a furrowed brow. Then, a quick glance at the screen. A flicker of hesitation. A glance up at Maya, then quickly back down. His hands froze mid-air, like they'd touched something he wasn't prepared for. Suddenly, the air felt colder than outside, despite the heating inside the terminal. A few passengers in line looked up, sensing something was off. "I'm sorry, I just need to double-check something," Alex mumbled, his voice suddenly quieter. He turned to a co-worker and whispered something, just low enough that no one could hear. But Maya didn't need to. She had seen that look before. She had heard that tone in rooms filled with red tape and unspoken consequences. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice calm but clear, steady. Alex swallowed, glanced at his colleague again, then turned back. The smile was gone, replaced by unease and averted eyes. I'm really sorry, Ma'am. The system just flagged your flight. The name of the deceased, Sergeant Kieran Bennett, appears to be under internal investigation, flagged by security." The words hit the air like a brick of ice. Passengers behind Maya began to stir. A woman whispered to her husband, "Investigation? She's a military doctor. What's going on?" Another employee behind the desk shot Maya a brief glance, then quickly turned away, pretending to be busy. Maya stood completely still. She didn't flinch, didn't move. Her eyes locked on Alex's, her voice level but trembling with restrained disbelief and anger. "An investigation? My brother died on the battlefield. I am escorting his remains home to our mother. What exactly are you saying to me right now?" Alex looked down, barely audible. "I'm just following protocol. I don't have the authority to override it." There was a beat of silence. Then Maya leaned in slightly. Her voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. Every word cut through the air like a blade. "You don't need authority. You just need a conscience." The air around the check-in counter felt like it had thickened. Not from the snowstorm outside, but from the growing cloud of suspicion that was slowly creeping across the room. Alex's voice cracked slightly. His fingers trembled on the countertop. He looked down at his screen, then back up at Maya. "The name? Sergeant Bennett. It matches someone else currently under investigation. There's a possible flag tied to a military data leak. We haven't been able to verify it yet. The name. All of this over a name." Maya didn't move. For a split second, her heart clenched in her chest. She inhaled deeply, the sound of wind howling through the terminal's glass doors, stabbing through what little calm she had left. "You're telling me that just because of a similar name, I'm being denied the right to bring my brother's ashes home?" Alex didn't answer. His eyes darted away like a kid caught lying. But Maya wasn't focused on him anymore. She slowly turned her head and realized that every pair of eyes was now fixed on her. A man in a grey business suit muttered under his breath, "Well, these data breach things happen all the time now." A young blonde woman with earbuds whispered, "I don't know. They just don't seem trustworthy." Untrustworthy. Because she was in uniform, and she was a woman. Because she was black. Because her brother's name sounded like someone else's. Maya clenched her fists. Her nails dug into her palms. She could feel her breath getting hot, her chest rising. But she didn't yell. She didn't flinch. She simply spoke, quietly, each word landing like a punch to the face of ignorance. "My brother saved 5 soldiers before dying in an ID blast. He deserves to be honored, not rejected because of a database error or prejudice." A heavy silence fell. No one looked at her now. And then, from a row of seats near the wall, a figure slowly stood. An older man, his posture still upright despite his years, a faded green bull cap on his head with worn gold stitching that read, U.S. Marines. Amid the thick tension hanging over the check-in area, the sharp scrape of a metal chair dragging across stone suddenly pierced the silence. Cold, loud, and unmistakable, like a warning bell. Every head turned. A man was rising to his feet. He wasn't tall, but he stood with a posture that hadn't bent for anyone in decades. His thick, olive-green jacket was neatly buttoned. Snow-dusted leather boots peeked out from under pressed slacks, and on his head, a faded ball cap embroidered with gold thread. U.S. Marines. Ecterra, veteran. He walked forward slowly, each step deliberate, as if he carried the weight of memory with him. His grey eyes, deep and steady, settled on Maya's face. Then, without a word, he turned to stare directly at Alex. "Do you even know what you're doing, son?" His voice was low, gravelly, but it rang out like a war drum. "This woman is a military doctor. She's escorting the remains of a fallen soldier. And whatever you're calling protocol should never be used to disgrace someone who served this country." Alex froze. His face flushed red. His co-worker next to him looked away, suddenly very interested in their screen. Maya glanced at the man, surprised. But he wasn't done. He took another step closer, his voice calm but firm, like it had silenced rooms before. "I've seen hell in Kaisan, in Hue, in the jungles of Laos, but I never thought I'd live to see the day a soldier, alive or dead, would be denied the right to come home by the very country they fought for." Around them, the atmosphere shifted. The curious stares turned to uneasy glances. A teenage girl quietly lifted her phone to start recording. A young man removed his earbuds, watching closely. The older man turned to Maya again. This time, his eyes softened. "You're not alone, ma'am. And we're not letting this get swept under the rug." And just like that, a new kind of energy began to spread through the waiting area. Not cold, but solemn, quiet, powerful. No one could say for sure who raised their phone first. But within less than a minute, camera lights began to flicker across the terminal. LED flashes lit up from the hands of passengers who, moments ago, were simply silent observers. Now they were becoming witnesses and voices. A young woman in her 20s, wearing a grey hoodie, stood a few feet back, live streaming from her phone. Her voice trembled slightly, but she spoke clearly. "Hey everyone, I'm at the Atlanta airport. This is Dr. Maya Bennett, a military officer, and they're refusing to let her fly. She's escorting her brother's ashes home. Security reasons? No, they say his name matches someone else under investigation." The middle-aged woman from earlier gasped and turned to her husband. "Oh my God. This is wrong. Completely wrong." A young man in a blazer, Bluetooth earpiece still in place, began furiously typing on his phone. The story hit Twitter, then Instagram, then Facebook. And it didn't stop. "Let her fly. Respect. Our soldiers. Justice for Kieran." The hashtag spread like wildfire. Emotions surged, passed from one person to the next like an electric current through soaked metal. Maya still stood motionless, one hand gripping the wooden box, the other resting gently over her chest. But in that moment, she was no longer just a soldier denied a seat. She was becoming a symbol of something larger, something society had learned to quietly accept. Injustice, in plain sight. Henry stepped beside her, his voice low and steady. "You see them now. They're watching. You're listening." Back at the counter, Alex scanned the crowd. His face had gone pale. Phones pointed straight at him. And now questions started rising from the crowd. Fast and loud. Won't they let her fly? They keep saying policy. But what policy? Is this how we treat people in uniform? The airport wasn't quiet anymore. It had become a courtroom without walls, where the stage was lit by hundreds of phone screens, and the audience was the entire nation, waiting to hear whether justice would finally speak. Amid the rising noise, like a tide rolling in, Maya remained still, unshaken, a pillar in the middle of a storm. But behind those calm eyes, her mind was racing, calculating. She had prepared herself for the possibility of resistance, but she hadn't expected it to come this quickly. Quietly, Maya reached into the inner pocket on the left side of her uniform. her fingers brushing against something cold and small, tucked close to her heart. A black USB drive. Small, compact, but more dangerous than anything she'd ever held in a war zone. She closed her eyes for a second. Sergeant Kieran Bennett's death wasn't just killed in action. Not even close. 3 days after his remains were returned to base, Maya had received an anonymous email. Attached was a video, recorded from a helmet cam worn by one of Kieran's teammates. In it, his voice was clear. "We shouldn't be here. This is a restricted zone." But the lieutenant gave the order. "There are civilians here, God." Then came the explosion. Smoke. Screaming. Heavy breathing, and finally, a single gunshot. Not from the enemy, but from behind. That footage was never filed in any official report. Maya, with years of battlefield instinct, didn't need anyone to tell her. Her brother didn't die from enemy fire. He died because someone in command tried to cover their tracks. That USB was the reason Maya had insisted on personally escorting his ashes home. And maybe, just maybe, bringing the truth with them. "I promised you, Kieran," she whispered, her hand tightening around the cold drive. "No matter what, I'll make sure the world knows." She didn't know who had sent the footage. She didn't know who might be watching her now. But the glances she was getting from certain airline staff told her one thing. Some people were nervous about her being here, and they were about to act. As the crowd grew louder and the live streams spread like wildfire, 2 men in plain clothes entered the check-in area. They moved through the terminal with quiet purpose. Not part of the crowd, as if they had never belonged to it. Their builds were lean and trained, their eyes cold, their footsteps too precise to be casual. They didn't speak at first. They simply flashed sleek military credentials, metal badges that glinted under the airport lights. And just like that, the air shifted. Alex visibly exhaled and stepped back. One of the men, tall, broad-shouldered, voice flat and mechanical, walked up to Maya. "Us Bennett," he said, expressionless. "We need you to come with us. There are procedural matters that require clarification regarding your assignment." And the identity of the deceased, Maya tightened her grip on the urn box. Her eyes narrowed. "Who are you? What unit? Who gave the order?" The second man, shorter, eyes like blades, raised his badge closer to her face. "Internal Operations Task Force. Orders from the Defense Coordination Center. We're authorized to remove you from civilian grounds." Before they could take another step, Henry Walsh, the Marine veteran, stepped forward, placing himself between them and Maya. "No written order, no formal command. You're not taking her anywhere." The taller man leaned in slightly, voice low and sharp. "Sir, you really don't want to be involved in this?" Henry let out a dry chuckle. His gaze didn't budge. "I jumped into enemy jungle in Laos in '71. Trust me, kid. I was involved before you even learned how to hold a rifle." The tension between the 3 men hung in the air like a live wire, taut, humming, ready to snap. Maya stood still, but inside she could feel it. This was no longer about a flight. She was no longer a passenger. She was now a threat, something to be contained. And then, ding! A phone chimed. The girl with the hoodie, still live streaming. "Ma'am, you're on CNN. Your story, it's blowing up." Maya turned her head. The young woman holding the phone was visibly trembling, not from fear but from excitement and disbelief. On her screen, the CNN Live logo burned bright with a breaking headline scrolling in red across the bottom. "Breaking. Military doctor denied boarding while escorting brother's remains. Allegations of abuse of authority," below it. Footage streamed from the Atlanta terminal. Maya, standing firm beside the urn, her hand clenched, a confused airline employee fidgeting behind the desk, and 2 plainclothesmen standing motionless like stone on either side of her. The terminal for a heartbeat fell silent, like the moment before a storm. Then, all at once, the phones in people's hands lit up with fresh alerts. The Guardian. Public outrage erupts in Atlanta. Veteran defends officer from questionable detainment. The New York Times. What's really going on with military transport protocols? NBC. Let Her Fly Hits 1. Nationwide trending. The sound of keyboards tapping spread like rain on a tin roof. From the crowd, a local journalist stepped forward, grey hair, glasses, press badge raised. "Dr. Bennett, can you comment, is it true you're carrying classified material tied to an ongoing military investigation?" Maya didn't answer. She didn't need to. She knew exactly what was happening now. The story had broken loose, and those trying to bury the truth no longer had control. Henry straightened up beside her, voice rising just enough to carry. "The whole country is watching, and we will not be silent." One of the plainclothes agents glanced down at his phone, his face paled. He whispered something to his partner. Both men took a step back. No further words. They had orders, and now they were unsure. Somewhere behind Maya, a passenger began to cry. Another clapped, slow, deliberate. Then the applause grew. It rolled through the terminal like thunder, not for victory, but because truth had cracked through the surface. Maya held the urn tighter. A cold gust blew in from the revolving door, but this time it carried something else besides chill. It carried hope. A sharp blare of sirens echoed outside the airport terminal, and with it came a sudden hush. People turned. The murmurs died instantly. The glass doors slid open, and through them stepped a group of uniformed military personnel. Not airport security, not shadowy agents, real soldiers. At the front walked Colonel Veronica Cross, a commanding black woman with close-cropped silver hair, wearing a perfectly pressed uniform, her eyes gleaming with the cold clarity of someone hardened by war and leadership. 2 officers followed her closely. They moved with precision, no wasted motion, no hesitation. The crowd instinctively parted as they passed. Livestream phones lifted higher. No one dared blink. Colonel Cross stopped directly in front of Maya. They locked eyes. No salute, no words, just a single, respectful nod from one warrior to another. She turned toward the airline staff, then set her sights on the 2 plainclothes men still lingering nearby. "Official order from the Pentagon," she announced, every word sharp and clear. "Dr. Mayor Bennett and the remains of Sergeant Kieran Bennett will not be transported on a commercial flight. A military aircraft has been deployed. We are taking over from this point forward." The terminal held its breath. One of the agents opened his mouth to object, but Colonel Cross shot him a glance, and he backed off without another word. "This isn't a clerical misunderstanding," she added, voice unwavering. "This is a profound failure of honor." Maya didn't say a thing. She simply stood there, arms wrapped around the urn, holding more than ashes, holding a legacy. Henry stepped beside her, resting a firm hand on her shoulder. "They were wrong," he whispered, "and now they know it." A single clap rang out from somewhere in the crowd, then another, then dozens more. In moments the terminal erupted with applause, not for a victory, but for a fallen soldier finally being shown the respect he earned. A cold wind swept through as Maya stepped out of the terminal. The wooden box held tightly against her chest like it was a part of her. The sky above was a dull grey. Snowflakes fell gently onto the shoulders of her uniform, melting slowly, like the silent tears of a mother who had never cried enough. Parked on the tarmac was a sleek military aircraft, gunmetal grey, its engines humming steadily, ready for takeoff. 2 young soldiers stood at attention near the boarding stairs. They didn't speak. They didn't move. They just saluted with quiet reverence. Henry Walsh followed behind her, his old U.S. Marines cap still firmly in place, his eyes fixed on Maya's footsteps, as if watching a reflection of the youth he once was. At the base of the stairs, Maya paused. She turned, gazing back through the glass at the terminal where a crowd still lingered. They were no longer just passengers waiting for delayed flights. They were now witnesses to a truth that had nearly been buried. A woman in the crowd held her phone up high and whispered, voice shaking, "Thank you for not staying silent." Maya gave a small nod, simple but heavy with the weight of everything she carried. She climbed the steps, took a seat by the window, and gently set the box down in front of her. Then, from her uniform pocket, she pulled out the black USB drive. She stared at it for a long time. The cabin lights glinted off its surface, gleaming like a stain that had yet to be scrubbed clean. She knew the people trying to silence her were still watching. She knew that video was a spark, and she was holding the match. "I won't stop, Kieran," she whispered, barely audible. "I'll let the truth speak, and I'll bring you home, not just in body, but in honor." The plane began to taxi. Through the window, Maya saw Henry standing by the terminal doors, his hand placed over his heart in a final salute. She returned it, hand over her chest where a promise still burned, unfinished. But Maya's story didn't end there. 3 days later, a national news report aired leaked footage from Syria. The internet erupted. Veteran organizations across the country demanded an investigation. The Department of Defense declined to comment. Maya, no longer an unknown doctor, had become a symbol, not because she sought it, but because silence was no longer an option. And from the cold of winter, a new war had begun, not with weapons, but with truth. Just imagine, what if one day, someone you love, a son, a brother, someone who wore the uniform and was willing to give everything for their country, wasn't allowed to come home with dignity? What if your mother had to wait in silence? What if you, like Maya, had to carry the ashes of someone you loved through a crowd of strangers, only to be stopped because of a system glitch, a suspicious glance, or simply because someone decided you didn't look trustworthy enough to board a flight? This story isn't just Maya's. It could be any of ours. Sometimes, the worst part isn't the denial, it's the silence that surrounds it. But that silence was broken by a Marine who stood up, by a young woman who hit record, by strangers who chose to raise their voices instead of turning away. And the real lesson here isn't just about injustice. It's about the power of decency, the strength of people who stand up for one another, for what's right, for honor, and for truth. If this story moved you, think of someone you love, and ask yourself, what would you do if it were them, standing in Maya's place? If this story made you pause, if it reminded you of someone, a loved one, a veteran, or simply someone who deserves to be treated with dignity, leave a comment, share what you're thinking, because every voice matters, and maybe, just maybe, yours could be the one that inspires change. If you believe this story needs to be heard, go ahead and like this video, and if you believe there are more stories like this that deserve to be told, subscribe to the channel. Because here, we don't just tell stories to entertain, we tell them to spark something, to move people, to open eyes, and to wake something up.